And so let me just ask you, Matt, you worked in D.C., and so you know things that most people don't. You've seen a lot. Why do politicians who are self-described fighters for the people, why do they not fight for health care during a pandemic, but they will cheer censorship from big tech monopolies? Who are they listening to?
Well, I mean, I think without being specific about, I don't want to speak to any particular politician because they're all, they all have different sort of track records. My general observation is that, you have to have, like, the basic problem on the progressive side is that progressives are just not interested in business. They just don't care about business one way or the other. And a lot of power in America flows through business. And I don't mean that it flows through big corporations controlling things. I mean, if you want to affect how some problem works, you're probably going to have to make some changes to a market structure, right? You're going to have to make some change to how finance works or whatever it is. If you want to roll out a vaccine to everyone in the right way, you're going to have to know the supply chains of how vaccines are made. And progressives, by and large, don't know anything about any of the systems they talk about. So when they, talk about, and this is not true of every progressive, but when they talk about like the problems that they want to address, they kind of segment the world into social problems we care about and the economy, which is all about like tax rates and redistribution, instead of recognizing that actually like these are very complicated systems that you have to understand, and that the downstream problem here that you don't like, whether it's kind of certain forms of racism or whether it's like, economic inequality, or whether it's not being able to make enough, vaccines or distribute it appropriately. That stuff often is, the reason it's happening is contained in boring spreadsheets, right? And not something you can hold signs about. And I think that that's something that we have to really start to figure out. How do you get progressives to understand and care about commerce again? Because that's really the core of it. How we do commerce is in many ways how we do justice.
Well, so again, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed like 40 years ago, the right-wing corporatists they started building their think tanks and laying down legal structures and legislation that ALEC, all that stuff. It doesn't seem to be a lefty equivalent to this. No, like they did.
There isn't, and the reason is because conservatives, like if you talk to like a 40-year-old newly elected Republican congressman on the right, they likely ran a business at some point in their life. Like that's where they come from. Whereas if you talk to like a 40-year-old newly elected Democrat, usually they were some sort of activist or lawyer, or they were in public service. They don't know anything about business. It's just not innate to them, and they're not that curious. There are exceptions. Katie Porter, for example, she really understands foreclosures. I don't know if you know, she's on the oversight committee. When she asks bankers about, she's not like a super lefty, but when she asks bankers about things, it's just brutal the way that she destroys people. But that comes from a deep understanding of the law and of banking practices and a lot of painstaking preparation. She really understands what she is talking about. And there are others, David Cicilline, like Pramila Jayapal. When you watch them on the antitrust subcommittee going after big tech, it was so different than when you watch that, like a bunch of other committees going after the same big tech people, because they had actually done the work to understand the business models. They had talked to the small business people who were getting screwed. They had read some of the contracts. They had gone through 1 million documents. They really understood these systems. And I don't really know a way to like make this point, except like you really, to make political change, you have to be really deep rooted and like marinated in the substantive policy questions. And like, because of annoying people like Hillary Clinton who pretend, Pete Buttigieg and like the West Wing, all of people who pretend that wonkiness is boring, when really what they are superficial, narcissistic idiots who don't know anything about policy. I mean, they've taken wonkiness and turned it into an aesthetic that is like, oh, this is all very complicated. And then they spit out gibberish. And like, I think that's a real problem, because this wonkiness, like this stuff is fascinating, right? The way that these laws work, it's all the money and power in the world. I mean, this stuff is super interesting. Americans will like obsess over football salary caps. You can't tell me that this stuff, there isn't a way to sell this stuff, right? You can't tell me that if you were to be clear about what all this stuff means, you to explain. I mean, FDR, all the Democrats used to be very clear about what this stuff was, that people wouldn't actually understand it and care about it. And when you look at like a CNN town hall during a presidential campaign, what you'll see is that the reporters will ask annoying questions about like, aren't you too liberal? And all this normal people will be like, I can't pay this bill. What do you have to say about this? They ask policy questions because that's what they expect from their government. So I think this is, really getting to like being grounded in commerce and business and the policy that comes out of that, and building a politics out of that, and not from these kind of weird ideological predispositions about like, fantastic utopias. That's kind of like my general approach to these problems.
How much of the responsibility for people not doing what you're talking about and not having the understanding that you're talking about would you lay at the feet of the 1996 Telecommunications Act?
No, I think it came before that. I think the Telecom Act was really bad, and it rolled up, like it allowed the roll up of media like Clear Channel as a result of the Telecom Act, and like all this consolidation was really problematic. And the Telecom Act also included Section 230. So it's like that's what created the media barons of today who are really dangerous, and then the big tech barons who are even more dangerous. So it's really bad. It's ruined our ability to think. But the idea that policy and politics are not connected, that politics is this kind of personal virtue, like the idea that politics is about personal virtue and not governing outcomes. That is a problem that I think that came from, like, that was coming in during Jimmy Carter. I mean, Jimmy Carter was like, I'm a president who will never lie to you. Like, that's not. And then like when Reagan, got rid of merger law and did a whole bunch of, Democrats basically didn't notice. They noticed the tax cuts. They noticed the racism, but they didn't notice all of the savings and loan scandals and all the merger booms and all that, Michael Milken, all that stuff. That stuff was complicated banking stuff. I don't know what, that's all boring. And that the idea that all the money and power in the world is boring, that was in Democratic politics and I think it came out of the counterculture, honestly. I think it came out of counterculture in the 60s. A lot of the people that are in the Democratic Party, that are in Silicon Valley, in the Republican Party, they're very counterculture. You notice like how they're all like, I'm not, Hillary Clinton got super offended being like, I'm not the establishment. How dare you call me the establishment? Yes. And it was like, why are you so embarrassed about being the establishment? I'm part of the establishment. Who gives a shit? Just be like, yeah, I'm part of the establishment. We have an obligation to govern well. But she got super offended at that. And the reason is because people in the counterculture, and that's where this all comes from, don't want to believe, they sort of abhor power. They think power is kind of bad, right? You mentioned earlier, you read a kind of somebody talking about how we used to know what the king did and then it all became hidden. One of the reasons it's hidden is because the people who are in charge don't actually think they're in charge. Like, you ever notice how when Obama would he was president, but he would like narrate and like observe, like he would treat his own presidency as if he were a pundit. Like, that's kind of part of it, right? Like, they don't actually think they're in charge, even though they have the positions that they've been clothed by authority by the voters. So that's, I think, like, we got to change that. We have to really kind of say, we want governing power. We want to govern. We want to make people's lives better with government, and we want to restructure markets. And we care about getting it right. We care about rigor. We care about these details. And that's what justice is. Justice is, God is in the details. Justice is in the details. Democracy is in the details, right?
So Chris Hedges talks about how America has lived through a corporate coup d'etat in slow motion, and that our dictator has been replaced by a nameless, faceless corporate state dictator. Do you agree with that? And we've been talking about how to break out of that. Could you give us your final thoughts on that?
I think a good way to illustrate see what he's getting at. I think a good way to illustrate that point is like, when you call up like your health insurance company or someone like that, and it like puts you on this like phone tree where they're like, tell us what you want. And you're like this, and they're like, I don't understand. And you're like, operator, and you can't get through to anyone. Like, that's because there's some, some consultant somewhere has said, we'll save money if we replace the first line of phone people with this automated system. And then when you finally do get through to somebody, they can't help you, and you're mad, and they're not in a good mood, and it's like, because they don't have any authority either. That's what's known as absentee ownership, right? That's a concept that economists, thinkers in like the 19th century developed, which is that the people who sort of are in control are not the people that feel the pain from the use of the property, right? So if you have too much land, you're not going to take care of it, right? If Mark Zuckerberg might own Facebook, but he doesn't know what's happening on the platform, and he doesn't feel the pain if bad things happen. That's absentee ownership. And so when you have institutions that are too big, monopolies, but also just institutions that are simply too big, then you get absentee ownership, and that creates a sense of alienation and frustration among everybody. And that's one of the things that's happened since the 1970s is a lot of these mergers didn't even concentrate kind of power. They just made institutions bigger and just less responsive. And I think that's it's not quite a dictatorship. Like, it's kind of like a system that's in transition. It could go like, it's corporatism. It could go towards autocracy and fascism. It could return towards democracy. Like, it could go either way. And that's kind of the way that I think about it. And like, no one's in charge. That's the other thing, is like, no one's really in charge. And we want people to be in charge. We want people to be running things. We just want those people to be elected. Like, I want a strong leader who wields power aggressively and gives orders, but I want that person to be elected, right? I want that person to be accountable. And people, I think this libertarian thing on the left has kind of convinced people that the use of authority is authoritarian, and instead of the use of private authority can be authoritarian, the use of public authority can be authoritarian, but the use of authority itself is not authoritarian.
Right. In fact, what I was saying around hashtag force the vote is the biggest abuse of power is not using the power you have for good.
That's right. And what I liked about force the vote, and I could have like, we could quibble, and I think there were a lot of quibble being like, oh, he's asking for the wrong thing,
right,
or whatever. And it's like, what I liked about it was you were asking for something, right? I don't care what it is. You were saying you are in a position of public responsibility, and you should use that power, whatever power you have, and you should be explaining how you're using that power. Yes. And in a dialogue about that. And I think that that's so important for the left, because there are all of these ways that people make excuses for losing, and losing in bad ways. And it's a problem. I don't mind if you lose. You're going to lose, right? It's okay to lose, but you have to learn from it, right? You have to like explain yourself. We have to get smarter and better. And one of the reasons that I've gotten disillusioned with the left, I mean, I felt myself very much on the left in the mid 2000s, is because that I didn't see that process happening. I didn't see people getting better at things. I saw the left continuing to sort of, like every other institution in America, just refuse to admit any problems and do the same corrupt, or not even corrupt things, just things that don't deliver what you want them to deliver, right? And so I think that that's like, and that's why I was happy to see what you did. And I'm like, this is a serious person, right? Like, because you're asking the right question, right? And that's the important thing, is you're asking the right question, and you're saying, you're our political leaders, sort of deliver something, or explain it, like, tell us why you can't, and then we'll figure it out, right? And I think that that's kind of the culture that we have to get to. That's the culture that the Democrats used to have, that kind of populist culture, and a kind of an open culture where disagreeing is fine, and even being a little bit mean, as long as it's kind of in good faith, is fine, as opposed to like this like weird aristocratic culture where you have to be civil. And I'm not for civility, don't get me wrong, but like, I'm not for civility over everything else. So that's kind of like, that's what I think is important about, and that's why I was like, I DM'd you afterwards. I was like, I think that this is important. I think that this conversation is important. It can go in lots of different directions, right? But there is power everywhere, right? And you don't have to have a majority to wield it. And it's just a change in our culture, in like the culture of the left, that I think would be really like, that would be really helpful. And we don't have, there's all, I mean, that's the thing about Congress and government. There's all of these really cool, fun tools that people have left in these institutions, these legal tools that they've been lying around for 200 years. And we've solved a lot of problems in this country, and a lot of those laws are still in force. There's just legal authority everywhere to just do stuff. And like, so let's find it and use it. And like, yeah, it's like, it's so much fun. It's so cool. Like, it's like really fun to govern. It's really fun to clean up messes in politics. And I just think that, like, instead of being morose about it, being like, oh, they control it all and there's nothing we can do, and there's 13-dimensional chess, like, no, let's just admit that we fucked things up and we can do better next time.
I agree 100%. I did not expect the amount of pushback I got by pushing the bare minimum of what everybody agreed on, which was to force a vote on Medicare for all. That's the bare minimum. And like you said, they could have asked for a million things more. They should have asked for a million things more. And they didn't ask for anything. Nothing happened. So you talk about being disillusioned with the left. Hashtag force the vote has made me realize there isn't a left in America, and that's the problem. Even the thing we all agree on, we couldn't agree on when it came time to do it. Half the left said, don't be mean, and let's wait for a better time. We're in the middle of a deadly pandemic. The left is completely lost in America, which is why we're the only country not giving people a UBI during this pandemic. Fucking Japan's giving people 100% of their paycheck. Canada's been giving people money. UK, Sweden, you know that. I don't have to tell you. They're all doing it. The only people who aren't doing it is the United States, who also doesn't have health care. So this is the only country this is happening in. And I try to tell people this isn't happening in any other country. And when I raise my voice and I ask why the fuck aren't they doing everything to get it for us, they don't talk back to me. They don't even show up to a town hall that had 100,000 people attended. They wouldn't even address it. And somehow still I'm the guy who's the fucking asshole. Well, if you have your head on straight, you know I'm not the asshole. I'm the pissed off constituent. They're the fucking people with power who have abandoned us. And that's where we are in this country. And we're sliding, 60% of small businesses that closed are closed permanently. This is unbelievable what we're living through. And people got upset. Well, they are letting politicians off the hook. Can you name a time, Matt? You know everything about everything. Can you think of a time when people were nicer to a politician and that got something done?
I think there are lots of different mechanisms to extract things that you want. Look, I was a congressional staffer. Flattery works. It just doesn't always work. But I think like the core here is that I don't think they know what they want. I don't think they're trying to scam. I think that like the left, my experience with sort of dealing with like the left, particularly the online left, and it's not that you're the online left because like that's kind of Twitter. You're not. You have people that watch and take this stuff seriously, but there has to be it's a two-way street, right? So if a politician came on your show and said, look, I don't think that getting a vote for Medicare for all is a good idea because we're going to lose the vote and that won't help anyone, but here's an alternative. I think what we need and what I'm going to ask for, it also doesn't, it's a procedural thing, but like, what can the House do that will make a difference? Well, I think the House has subpoena power, right? Which means that they can demand documents from anyone in the country, any corporation in the country, any nonprofit, whatever you want. So, and then you could do this with a majority vote of a committee. So what I'm going to ask for is put 3 committees together to investigate this area, and this area. I want you to investigate insulin prices. I want you to investigate whatever, farm consolidation, and I want you to investigate police abuse, whatever it is. And I want you to give them subpoena power, right? That's what I think we need. And I want people that, we pick to run these committees, and that's what we want. We want to do it with centrists because they have like, they're half the caucus and we're half the caucus, so we'll do this in a joint way. That would be and if somebody came on your show and said that, I feel like that would be something that would make sense. You could have a discussion about whether that worked. But the thing is, the culture, like from the perspective of a politician, if they went on a show and they like started to do that and you like push back and they got embarrassed, like that could be their career being over. And the problem that we have on the left is that the ecosystem and it's not it's not like people like Matt Taibbi. It's kind of this broader world of MSNBC and like these kind of lefty podcasty type of things. They don't think coherently about policy. So if you were to bring an idea of let's do these investigations and do subpoena power and really ask tough questions of powerful people and do investigations and then lay out policy ideas for restructuring these areas of the economy, I don't think that most of those people would be happy because they haven't yet internalized the idea that this stuff matters. So part of the job is to say, we are going to figure out a real agenda here that is like a coherent agenda. You could do healthcare. You could say, I want a special subcommittee. I want a committee on healthcare. And I want to understand why all these drug prices and hospital prices are so high. And I want to lay out a bunch of ideas at the end of this Congress on bills that would actually address this. Because, the healthcare system seems to be creating a lot of private jets. And I want to stop that, right? If they, but in order to get there, you'd need to have a lot of the nonprofits and people in the progressive space saying, we have to get into the nitty gritty details here of these systems. And that's, I think, that's kind of where we have to go, where we should go as a kind of political culture. And just because of the pandemic. Anyway,
Matt Stoller, I really appreciate you spending, again, I didn't know we are going to talk this long, but it's been interesting and riveting all along. So thank you for making time. And I hope whoever has been making you dinner in the background has something nice for you to eat. Is that what's been going on?
No, that's my wife. She made herself dinner. Now I'm going to go fix myself something.
That's nice. You remind me of a Rodney Dangerfield joke. My wife and I, we sleep in separate beds. We take separate vacations. We eat dinner separate. We're doing everything to keep our marriage together. So Matt Stoller, check out his book, the author of Goliath, The 100-Year War Between Monopoly, Power, and Democracy. You're always welcome back. Please come back. We'll have more of these conversations. I think they're necessary, especially right now.
Hey, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Okay.
Talk to you later.
Hey, everybody, this is the part where I tell you where all our live shows are, but there aren't any. And then this is why I tell you to join our premium program and get extra content, but nobody's got a fucking job. So just enjoy the video.